And we are back with the fifth segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this fifth segment, we are going to be looking at the first round of the Western Conference. And we are going to just be analyzing the round and see exactly like what the teams need in order to be successful in the next season, what I expect them to do, and things of that nature. So we'll start with the Phoenix Suns and the Timberwolves and their series. I did not expect this series to end in a sweep. This was I figured the Suns would put up a little bit more of a fight against the Timberwolves, and I genuinely didn't think that the Timberwolves were going to be able to sweep the Suns just based off of the talent that the Suns have and, the ability that the Timberwolves have to defend the perimeter. I genuinely thought that the Suns would be able to maintain a consistent enough offense to be able to win the series, but they weren't able to keep up with they weren't able to perform really well on the offense at all. Like they didn't score 100 points until game 3 in the series, and they just weren't able to keep up with the Timberwolves in terms of scoring. I mean, game 1, 120 to 95, game 2, 105 to 93, game 3, 126 to 109. And the biggest problem with the Suns was the fact that they were like relying on that star power and that isolation type of basketball play to win this series. And while it worked for the Mavericks a little bit, it's not really easy to maintain that kind of offense long term. And it's not easy to just be that consistent long term, especially in a high leverage series and a high leverage game like the postseason. And the fact that the Suns didn't have like a strong enough defense to be able to counter the Timberwolves is another thing that I felt like they suffered in this game and in this series. It was just the lack of defense coming in from the Suns and ultimately their lack of offensive production as well. If you're not going to have defense, you need to at least be able to perform on the offensive side of the ball. And having only 3 players that can do anything with the ball, and the fact that all 3 of those players take the most inefficient shot in the NBA, contested mid ranges and mid range pull ups, that also didn't help them in the series. Like if you're constantly looking for that shot when you're looking for your offense to get rolling, it's very difficult to get into a rhythm. And you need to take a little bit more efficient shots, and your teammates also have to be taking those efficient shots. And it's just the fact that every single one of those players on the big 3, Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, and Bradley Beal, the fact that they all take those contested mid-range shots, it's not a good shot, and it's not really a shot that they can live with taking long term. And that's that's ultimately my opinion on the series. It's just the fact that their offense and the game plan that they had going in, and the fact that Bradley Beal just wasn't a factor in the closeout game in game 4. It's like all of these things, and it's like it's the same story with the Brooklyn Nets, really, in my opinion. And it's like that offense isn't going to be sustainable long term if you don't have a good enough defense for that. And it comes down to those 3 players just not playing well at the right moment. And it's like really that's all what it comes down to, because that's really the biggest problem with isolation offense. It's like what happens if if all of your players that run the isolation just don't end up hitting their shots. And that was the same story with Brooklyn in game 2 when they were up by so much. Kevin Durant and Kyrie, they were taking the shots that they would normally make, they just weren't making them. And that's really like where the big issue comes in with the series. And the I don't really expect the Suns to be able to do much with this big 3, especially since they traded away so many pieces to get that big 3. They're really putting themselves in a tough spot to be able to do anything in the future, especially with Kevin Durant's not getting any younger. And while Devin Booker is relatively young, he's also not getting any younger. And it's just I feel like all of these, and wasting all of their draft capital on just to be able to get Kevin Durant, it wasn't ideal either. So that's really my opinions. And like KD on the Suns and KD on any other team that isn't the Warriors has been struggling. So I don't really know what the Suns can do to really fix that. Now, the Lakers series, on the other hand, oh my lord, I have a lot to say on that series, because that series was ridiculous. And I'm the reason why the Lakers lost that series, the biggest reason, I can't think of any other reason other than bad luck. It's that simple. Bad luck. Now, Jamal Murray, he turns into the best player in the world when going up against the Lakers. The shooting efficiency from the team going up against the Lakers was ridiculous. And when you compare their shooting splits against the Lakers and compare that to their shooting splits against any other team that they've played in the postseason, whether it be this year, whether it be last year, whether it be the year before, whether it be the year before that, they did not shoot nearly as efficiently and nearly as good as they did when going up against the Lakers. I don't know what it is with Denver. They just turn into a different animal when going up against the Lakers. And the fact that D'Angelo Russell was playing really, really bad in the postseason didn't help anything. So I genuinely think the Lakers, other than the fact that D'Angelo Russell was bad and Darvin Ham is also really bad, they got destroyed, and it was bad luck because the shots that the Nuggets were hitting were ridiculous. They're crazy difficult, and they're able to hit, and they were able to do it at a consistent rate. And this was the same story last year. Like, the Nuggets, they just hit some of the craziest shots imaginable when going up against the Lakers. And when you look at the numbers and just how much better they shoot going up against the Lakers compared to every other team, especially Jamal Murray in particular, it's staggering. It is crazy how efficient they shoot, and it's literally you can't really boil it down to anything other than bad luck, because shooting, while it is partly skill, it's also luck, because it's a make or miss league, and they were just making every single shot. And that was the big reason, because realistically they had the matchups. They had LeBron. Obviously LeBron is good against any kind of matchup. Anthony Davis is a good enough rim protector to be able to slow down Nikola Jokic. Well, not the best rim protector, just good enough to be able to slow him down just a little bit. But it's just the fact that Jamal Murray and the rest of the Nuggets, along with Jokic, they were hitting some of the craziest shots. And there's really there was no team in the history of the league that would have beaten the Nuggets in either of those series, because of just how crazy they were hitting the shots and just how often they were hitting those shots. So that's my opinions on that first round matchup and why the Lakers ultimately ended up losing, because it's the shooting splits were ridiculous. I wish I had the exact numbers talking about the shooting splits. I might do a completely different I might do a whole new segment just talking about why are the Nuggets so much better playing against LA than any other team. And then I'll show you those numbers because they're ridiculous. I don't have them off the top of my head, however. So next series is the Clippers against the Mavericks. This was the first series where James Harden actually played better in the postseason as opposed to how he plays in the regular season. However, he also had a stinker performance in one of these playoff games. I believe it was Game 5 and in the closeout Game 6, where he always has these flame out performances. It's every single season with him. So it's while his averages were better, it's not like he changed his ways in the postseason. So that's and the fact that they're the Clippers, it also doesn't help things either. The Clippers, they have a history of losing these big games. They have a history of losing in series when they're supposedly supposed to win. They were the favorites of making it to the finals in some part of the season. I believe it was the middle of the season when they got James Harden. And it's just the fact that they have these expectations, and the Clippers as an organization, they just don't ever meet them. Not to mention the fact that Kawhi Leonard was also injured for the postseason, which also ended up hurting things for the Clippers. And it ultimately, it decided the series, the fact that Kawhi Leonard wasn't going to be playing in some of these games. And really, that's been the issue with the Clippers, the fact that they're never able to get both Kawhi and Paul George to be healthy in the same postseason. And that's been the issue for the Clippers for the longest time, since having Kawhi and Paul George, and the fact that they're just unable to close out important games. So really, the Clippers, they have to hopefully extend re-sign Paul George and give him that max contract, And, maybe they can get Harden as well and try to compete yet again. But they really have to work on closing out games. They have to work on closing out the series. And they really, really have to work on making sure that Kawhi and Paul George are healthy for the postseason, which is the biggest issue that the Clippers have had for the longest time in the Paul George and the Kawhi Leonard era. Just the fact that they keep getting injured. And next on the list of series is the Thunder going up against the Pelicans. Not really much that needs to be said because, the Thunder didn't have experience. The Pelicans also barely had experience playing in the postseason. On top of the fact that they didn't have Zion, on top of the fact that they lost Zion in the play-in game when the Pelicans were up against the Lakers. And that ultimately, it crippled the franchise, and it's losing your best player on your team going into the postseason, it's never a good sign. And the fact that Zion is one of the primary scorers and they lost one of their primary scorers is a big reason why I think this series wasn't that competitive. So I can't really give a good scale as to what the Pelicans should do other than make sure that Zion stays healthy and he stays in shape, because that was the biggest killer with Zion, and that's the big reason why a lot of people don't really think Zion is going to develop, because of his status with the team and his status with his eating habits, his status with his health, all of those things. And I think that if Zion was in this series, it would have been a little bit more competitive. So I'm not really going to give the Pelicans any kind of scrutiny, because losing your best player on your team, it's not really fair to judge another team's season and their little bit of success going into in the postseason if their best player isn't available to them. So really, I think the chemistry between these guys just has to be a little bit better, and Zion has to stay a little bit healthy. Maybe they could make their roster slightly better if they engage in trade talks in the offseason. We'll see what they do, but this roster that they have, it's not a bad roster. They do lack a rim protector, which is something that I expect them to get and pursue in the free agency market, but the fact that they're just, they're inexperienced and they didn't have their best player, I feel like that was the biggest reason why they ended up losing that series, especially losing in a sweep. It's really just because they didn't have their best players. And if Zion was in there, I think the series would have been a little bit more competitive. And if they, granted, I really feel like, this team could be destined to do great things with the players that they have. They just need to get better chemistry and they need to play a little bit more together because, Zion has had an issue of staying healthy in the regular season as well. So I really feel like all of those factors need to be taken into account when judging the Pelicans, and maybe they can get better in the offseason. So that's really my opinions on the entirety of the playoffs and the matchups, and why I feel like the matchups ended up going the way that they did, and what the teams need to do to sort of fix it. Because not every team can fix their solution. Some teams, they might have to rework their roster and things of that nature. But in reality, it's all down to just how the matchups go and how you play in when your team desperately needs you to play well. And that's the big story in every single postseason. So that's all I have for you on this podcast. That's the end of this segment. Thank you so much for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It really does make a difference. We also invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram for more content and updates. As usual, please remember to use the link in the description to get your comments recognized, or the link displayed below the ticker on every single show segment. That is GSMCPodcast.net. It really helps the show. It makes the show more interactive between myself and you guys. That is all I have for you in this podcast today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am your host, Nelson, and as always, take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go.